Hello, it is time for my May reading wrap up, and I read loads in May. It was a bit of a weird month actually, because I felt a little bit slumpy, and yet I still read more books this past month than I've read in any other month this year. So I read 17 books in total, which amounted to 7,502 pages. So I was reading relatively big books in places as well. So for example, in April I read 13, which was my second best reading month in terms of numbers this year, and I'd read 5,215 pages. So in 4 extra books I read 2,300 more pages. So relatively big-ish books. Now my author diversity statistics are still not as good as I would prefer. I read 7 books by BIPOC authors, but it's not as bad as it was in April when I only read 2 out of the 13. So it's moving in the right direction, but it still needs improvement. I am slightly concerned that this video could be quite long, but I have actually done dedicated videos already for quite a few of these, so anywhere that applies, I'm not going to talk about them at all in this video. I will just direct you to those other videos if you want to hear my thoughts on those books. I also recently did a video talking about the series that I currently have on the go, or that I have first books in series to start, that kind of thing. So I will talk you through that at the end of the video in terms of how I'm doing as of the end of May with series. Okay, so let's get into it. So the first 3 books that I read in May, I actually did a 48-hour reading vlog for, so you can go and watch that to hear my thoughts. They were Unwind by Neil Shusterman, The Empire of Dreams by Ray Carson, and Ash by Melinda Lowe. I did also start in that vlog an anthology called Meet Me at the Intersection, but I actually haven't finished that anthology yet, so it's not going to appear in this wrap up. The next book that I read in May was The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, and this was the start of my reread of the trilogy, which I did with Joanna from the channel Joanna Sosa. We reread the books and rewatched all of the films, and I have videos for each of the books. So for The Hunger Games, Catching Fire and Mockingjay. So again, I'm not going to talk about these 3 here, they were rereads anyway, but I have detailed videos about the reread process that you can watch if you are interested in that. And then a couple of books that are on the other side of the room and I can't be bothered to go and get them right now were rereads of Keeper of the Lost Cities and Keeper of the Lost Cities Exile by Shannon Messenger. Those were rereads of books 1 and 2 of the Keeper of the Lost Cities series. You've probably heard me talk about this series quite a few times at this point. It follows Sophie, who grows up in the human world feeling very different because she is a telepath, and then she finds out why she feels so different. It's because she's actually an elf, and she is taken to the elven kingdoms, and there's a magic school, there's great friendships. I was talking about it on the reading sprints for the Olympics readathon on the 2nd of June. There's cute little middle grade romance and flutters over hand holding. It's really precious. It is wonderful. I love it. I was having a little bit of a tough mental health month in places throughout May, and so when I was feeling a little bit on edge, I would pick up a reread. So I did actually do quite a lot of rereading, as you'll notice as we move through this, during the month of May, and Keeper of the Lost Cities is just very feel good, so I picked a couple of those up this month and I'm really glad I did. It was lovely to reread those books even though I only read them for the first time last year. Thoroughly enjoyable. Next, I read this beautiful book, Firekeepers Daughter by Angeline Booley, which is a kind of a mystery, thrillery type book. It's very contemporary in style, but Angeline Booley is an Indigenous author. She is from the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. And the protagonist lives on an Ojibwe reservation, although she's not an enrolled member of the Ojibwe tribe for various reasons that I won't get into because I don't want to spoil. This was a really interesting read for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's very much not my typical genre of reading. I'm a fantasy reader, so reading a contemporary mystery thrillery type book is kind of outside of my normal wheelhouse, which was enjoyable. And also the Indigenous representation in this was really interesting as well. Basically, our character in this, she lives on this reservation, so it's quite a small community that is quite closely linked with each other, so everybody kind of knows everybody and knows what's going on, and something is happening. I don't want to kind of go into too much detail about what it is that's being investigated. It's not a murder mystery, I'll say that, but something is going on in this community, and our protagonist, whose name I've forgotten, Donis, ends up getting involved with the FBI and the investigation into this thing that's going on. So she's involved with an FBI agent and a member of, I can't remember what, he's a police detective. He's not for the FBI, he is part of some sort of Indigenous police force. I'm really not sure, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it now. I read a lot of books in May. But she's involved with them. She and this police officer and this FBI agent are basically now undercover. She's a confidential informant investigating this thing that's going on. And I saw a reviewer on Instagram review this book, and I can't remember off the top of my head who it was, but I will leave a link to their review if I can find it in the description. And what was interesting, I read that review partway through reading this book. I just came across it in my Instagram feed. I was maybe a few chapters into this book at the time, and this Instagrammer was commenting on the dangers of showing the relationship between the protagonist, the Indigenous protagonist. This is a black reviewer, by the way. This Indigenous protagonist and a police officer, and this relationship of trust that develops between them, and this reviewer's concern that it romanticizes the relationship between BIPOC individuals and the police. And I don't know, I found that review really interesting to read just in general, but also particularly while I was reading the book, because I wouldn't have thought of it like that. So that, I mean, I'm not really analysing that or anything, but I wanted to draw your attention to it because I found it interesting. And it's only an Instagram post review, so of course it's not very long because there's not much space. So I'd recommend going and having a read of that just for that extra perspective. I don't think I've seen any Own Voices reviews of this yet. It is pretty new out, so I'm sure there will be. I haven't seen any yet, but I look forward to hopefully coming across some Indigenous Voices reviews of this one, and all the better if they comment on that point as well, because I think that would be interesting. From there, I went back to the middle grade and I read Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston, which, funnily enough, follows the character Amari, whose brother has gone missing, and the police have basically given up looking for him, but she believes that he can still be found, and she's determined to find him. And then she finds a briefcase in her house with a clue that could lead her to her brother's whereabouts, and it ends up with her going to this magical school. And this was quite a fun, adventure-filled story with lots of twists and turns. I mean, it was slightly predictable for an adult reader, of course, but I feel like if it were being read by its intended audience, they would probably find that there's quite a few shock moments in this story. Like, they weren't shocking to me, but I can see a middle grader being shocked by some of the things that are revealed throughout the story. And I also feel like it's probably upper end of middle grade, lower end of young adult. So it's definitely a book that could span those two kind of reading age ranges. But I really enjoyed this. It's the first book in a series. I don't know how long the series is going to be, but I feel like it's the kind of series that could get really, really interesting. There's lots of kind of mysteries to uncover, magic to explore, friendships to make. There's like a were-dragon in here. It was really fun. It was a really, really fun time. Next, I reread / read Heartstopper Volume 4. I say reread / read because I had read the majority of this already on Tapas, but it wasn't all out at the point that I received the physical copy, so I reread the beginning bit that I had already read on Tapas, and then I finished the last bit for the first time. Loved it. I've mentioned before, I really enjoy this series. It's a graphic novel series about Nick and Charlie who are in secondary school and fall in love, and it's cute, but they also deal with issues. They deal with homophobia, they deal with biphobia, they deal with mental health difficulties, they deal with families not being accepting of their sexualities, Charlie in particular deals with OCD and an eating disorder. There are trigger warnings for this particular volume of Heartstopper because of particularly the depictions of suicidal thoughts and eating disorders and self-harm, because that's kind of the main thing that Charlie in particular is dealing with in this volume, like the others as well, but in this volume in particular. So it's fantastic in my opinion, basically. Next, I read a book that is in the other room, and I can't bother to go get that either, so we're just gonna talk about it. And that was A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir, which is book 2 in the Ember Quartet, so continuation of a series. So is this technically. We'll go through series properly at the end. And this one was more travel based, I would say, than An Ember in the Ashes. An Ember in the Ashes basically all happens within one city, and then this one is starting to kind of branch out into the world and various things are happening. Our characters aren't all in the same place, all basically dealing with the same situation as they are in the first book. I think I possibly enjoyed the first book slightly more, but just because of that competition element that exists in the first book. It's one of my favourite tropes, so I just naturally would gravitate towards that particular plot line rather than the one in this story, which is more of a travelling type story, which is not my favourite trope. So, but I still enjoyed it. I still like the characters. I feel like there's still lots of secrets to uncover. I'm hoping to continue with the series in the month of June, so I'm interested to see where else this series is going to go. I always find it quite difficult to talk about second books in series or middle books in series, so I'm going to leave it there. I did enjoy it. Then I read The Dragon Reborn by Robert Jordan. I don't know whether this video or my reading vlog for this book will be out first, but either way I have done a reading vlog reading this one, so I'm not going to talk about it here. You can watch that if it's already out, watch it whenever you want. If it's not, then it will be out pretty soon, I would have thought. Not my favourite so far, but I'll leave it to other me to talk about that one. This is feeling like more and more books the further I go into this wrap up. But the next one I read was The Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerri Maniscalco. I have this beautiful fairy loot edition of this one, which is just stunning, stunning, stunning. This was a fun read. It's quite frivolous, but I don't really care. It was a good time. I enjoyed myself reading this. Initially it follows two sisters, twin sisters, Amelia and Vittoria, but then Vittoria is brutally murdered and Amelia is the one that discovers her body and she swears revenge. Now they're witches, they're not, you know, they're not kind of out and proud witches, they're the kind of witches that keep themselves hidden. And then Amelia, in her hunt for revenge, ends up summoning a demon, basically, Wrath, who she is then working with to try to discover who murdered her sister and get revenge upon them. And there's a little bit of romance in here, there's the mystery element in here. It was really good fun. It wasn't kind of wow, shocking mystery type of thing, but it was really enjoyable. It's kind of like a popcorn type book. Like, it's nothing super special, but you can't stop consuming it, you know? So, no offense to anybody who absolutely loves popcorn, by the way. I actually can't eat popcorn, which is quite sad, but never mind. I enjoyed this book, and the sequel will be out at some point this year, and I'll probably buy the Fairy Loot edition because they'll doubtless do one, and I look forward to reading that book too because this was good fun. Next, a book that wasn't necessarily fun but was still really, really enjoyable, and that is The Conductors by Nicole Glover. And this is somewhat outside of my normal wheelhouse as well, so I did read quite broadly this month. So this is, what is this? This is historical fiction fantasy murder mystery. Basically, it's really a fusion of all of those things. And one interesting thing that I will say about this one that isn't really about the book but is just an interesting thing that I noticed is I was listening and following this book for most of the time. Sometimes I was just listening, but for the majority I was listening and following along in the print edition, and a lot of the dialogue is different between those two versions, between the audio version and the print version, which I thought was weird, and I don't know how or why that happened. I mean, the ultimate meaning of the same was the same. The story didn't really change as a result of that difference, but they were different, and I thought that was weird. So I just thought I'd mention it. If anybody happens to know why that happens, let me know because I'm interested. But either way, this was following Hetty and her husband Benji, who are kind of like, they're in a marriage of convenience, really. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't an arranged marriage, but it wasn't, you know, a love marriage at all. It was just, you know, it's helpful for us to be married, so let's just be married kind of thing. And you kind of watch their relationship throughout the book, which I really enjoyed, that aspect of the story. There's also the magic to learn about, which is about kind of, I mean, there are different kinds of types of magic, and I don't want to get too into it because I feel like learning about it is kind of half the fun of this story, but it has to do with drawing constellations, I'll say that, which I thought was really interesting and really different to any other kind of magic system that I have read. It is a soft magic system, not a hard magic system, but I still found it enjoyable because there was some kind of explanation of it. It wasn't just, you know, you wave your wand and a thing happens. So I enjoyed that about it. The mystery was engaging. I mean, I wasn't fazed either way by the historical setting. It did add another layer to the story because it doesn't say when in time it is set, and I'm really bad at history. I couldn't give you a decade. I mean, possibly the 50s? I don't know, to be honest, but it's shortly after the emancipation, and there's still so much, well, I mean, there still is now, but you know, even a greater level, there's still so much racism that the characters are dealing with. And these two particular characters, Hetty and Benji, were called the Conductors because they helped slaves escape from their slavers. So I mean, historical fiction is not really my thing. I could take or leave it, but that did add a really interesting layer to the story, I thought. So I enjoyed this one. I would recommend it, and I'm glad I read it. It was definitely very, very different to the normal kind of thing that I read, but I liked it anyway. It was really engaging, and it's not that long, but it's still read very quickly, you know. On to another reread now. I reread The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson, the final book in Mistborn Era 1. I am going to be joining in on a live show discussion of this one, hopefully. I'm not sure when in June that's going to be, but at some point. So I'm not going to talk about it here, not to mention the fact that I've talked about Mistborn probably enough times on this channel. But one fun fact that I will give you is that this is probably either my third or fourth read of this book. I can't honestly remember. I think it's my third, but it could be my fourth. And this is the first time that I actually cried during the ending. And I think the reason for that is because the first time I read the ending, I think I was on public transport, so I didn't allow myself to get emotional about it. And then the next times that I read it, I was listening to the audiobook and doing other things, because that's what I usually do. Is when I'm just listening to an audiobook, I'm usually doing something else alongside it, so I didn't kind of let the full impact hit me. But this time I was sat following along in the book, and just tears happened. So that's new for me. After that I read Exile, which was Keeper of the Lost Cities book 2, because I needed that. I finished The Hero of Ages on the Friday, and then on the Saturday night Joanna and I watched Mockingjay Part 2, the film, which is also quite devastating. So I really needed a pick-me-up at that point, which is why I went back into Keeper. And then the final book that I read in the month of May was Empire of Sands by Tasha Suri, which didn't work for me, unfortunately. I wanted to finish it because it was the Thoughtful Book Club book for May, and lots of the people who read it together really enjoyed it, so I kind of wanted to give it its full chance. But yeah, it didn't really work for me. I didn't feel connected to the characters. I was listening to the audiobook, so I don't know if that slightly impacted on my enjoyment of the writing, because a lot of people said that they thought that the writing style was really beautiful. That doesn't usually, you know, either attract me or put me off. Normally, occasionally, like with Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, the writing will be particularly good, and I'll really enjoy that about it. But normally it's not something that really weighs into my feelings on a book, but I didn't notice it, so that's just probably worth pointing out. And yeah, the characters didn't engage me, the plot didn't really grab me at any point. It was just fine. I didn't like actively dislike it. If I'd been actively disliking it, I would have DNF'd it, but I didn't, you know, it wasn't anything special for me. So unfortunately a bit of a downer to end the month on there, but that's where we're at with that. So let's talk about series very quickly before I wrap this video up, because it is, as anticipated, quite long. So I started the Unwind series by Neil Shusterman. I may continue with it at some point, but it's not going to be a huge priority. I enjoyed that book, but it's not kind of like high priority to continue with the series necessarily. The Empire of Dreams helped me finish the Fire and Thorns series by Ray Carson, so that is a series finished. The Hunger Games, I reread the whole trilogy. Keeper of the Lost Cities, I started a reread. I'm not really counting that within series stuff, so I might as well mention I finished my reread of Mistborn Era 1. Not really relevant. Amari and the Night Brothers is a series that I started, but I'm caught up on it because there's only one book so far. Heartstopper, I'm caught up on because I've read all of the books that are currently out. There's just one more volume to go. I'm really sad that it's going to come to an end, actually. A Torch Against the Night, so I continued with the Ember Quartet, hoping to continue again in the month of June. The Dragon Reborn, I was continuing with Wheel of Time there. Kingdom of the Wicked, I started a new series with that one, but I am caught up because that's the only book that's out so far. And Empire of Sand is part of, well, it's sort of a duology, sort of companion books. Either way, I won't be continuing with that particular series. So actually not too bad with the series this month. I finished one, continued a few, I'm caught up with a few, and the one that I started that I'm not caught up on, I'm not particularly bothered about catching up on it super fast. So not too bad on the series and statistics front. Lots of books read in May. I'm hoping to read lots of books in June as well because I am participating in the Olympics readathon over with the Shelf Spacers. But yeah, for the most part, a pretty good reading month, even if my mental health wasn't the best and I therefore felt slightly slumpy. It actually was pretty good. And that's part of what is quite good about reviewing books in this way in a monthly wrap-up, is it gives you kind of a different perspective on the reading that you've been doing in a given month. So I quite enjoyed that. Don't forget to check out Ponderful Books in the description. And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks, bye!